I serve as the president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, or AAPD. And for a visual description, I'm a white woman in a purple dress, wearing red lipstick, I have brown hair, and I'm using a mobility scooter for my cerebral palsy. So today we're going to talk about what democracy means to us. We're going to go over the disability vote landscape, talk about what Rev Up is, and see Rev Up in action. So doing some level setting, voting is one way that we can be engaged to make change. Voting is about the power of choice, and that is really important to people with disabilities because our choice gets taken away a lot. Not necessarily, well, in big ways and in small ways. So I'll use an example. If I use paratransit, I don't get to choose when I leave or when I get picked up. I might have to get picked up 2 or 3 hours before my appointment and just wait. So I don't have control over my time. If I live in a group home, I'm told what I can eat at what time. I'm told if I can date people. And so choice, any way that we can ensure that people with disabilities have choices is important. And then voting is also a path to building community and building people power, which is the most powerful thing we have. A woman named Rebecca Solnit said that voting is a chess move, not a Valentine. So when we vote for people, we're not saying, oh, you're so nice, I like you. It's a strategic decision. We're saying, I believe that you're going to be the person who's going to work the best for me. And people can make different choices. How many of you play chess? A few folks, right? So, Carly, you might be moving the rook in an L shape. Someone else might be moving a pawn forward. And each choice is fine. We're all playing the game differently, but it's not just something that we give out because we like someone. The fight for accessible democracy is long and ongoing, and it's one that is constantly evolving. One thing that folks should know is that election laws are different in every state. Sometimes they differ by county. And the work that AAPD does is nonpartisan. So we are not talking about endorsing candidates. On this slide is a photograph of a young woman with braids in her hair, and she has a sign that says, I vote because Judy Heumann fought for me. And Judy Heumann was a foundational, pivotal disability rights advocate who helped create things like Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So what does voting mean to you? Carla, I'm going to pick on you because I know you well.
Voting, I think, means the ability to make choices and the ability to hold people accountable.
The ability to make choices and the ability to hold people accountable. Mr. Reporter, who I met last night, what does voting mean to you?
Voting means having to choose who you think is going to represent you the best and who has your best interest at heart.
Who is going to represent you the best and who has your best interest at heart? What about you guys over here? What does voting mean to you?
Okay, I would say for me, it's about that self-direction and about choosing the direction that we want our country and our world to go in. It may not work out, the way that we choose, or it may, but the choice itself is so important. It's all about that self-direction and saying that this is what I see for the future, and this is where I want the world to move. Kind of like in that chess example, moving it forward. In that chess example that you were talking about. Oh, sorry. I've had laryngitis, so I'm a little, but yeah, definitely for me, it's just using our individual power to move the world in a direction that we want it to go.
I love that. Very beautiful. Does anyone else want to share what voting means to them? I will add that for me, voting is a way to remind people that we're here and we matter. So often, people try to shove disabled people away. They put us in institutions, or they might make it hard for us to leave our homes. And voting is one way that we say, we are here, we matter. So, question for you all. How many eligible disabled voters are there in the United States? Anyone have a guess? 40 million, yes. I said this last night.
I was thinking 39 million.
It's 40.2 million eligible voters with disabilities in the United States, and that is as of the 2024 November general election. So this number likely has grown even since then. Let's break down what that 40.2 million means. So 40.2 million is 1/6 of the total electorate in the United States. That makes people with disabilities one of the biggest voting populations in the country. And if you include eligible voters and our families and our friends, so if basically we looked at everybody who's coming to Family Cafe, right, and looked at this community as the disability vote, that number goes from 40.2 million to 72.7 million, which would be 1/3 of the total electorate. 1/3 of the total electorate. There are 7.1 million eligible voters with disabilities across 7 battleground states, which for us means Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. We can have a discussion about whether or not Florida is a battleground state. I would be interested in your thoughts.
We're part of the Sun, they always say that Florida is a Sun Belt.
Florida is a part of the Sun Belt. But when you think about those numbers, both more than 70 million voters with a connection to disability, and then 7 million voters in battleground states, that means that people with disabilities and our families have the power to shape elections and shape the direction of this country. And on this slide is a young black woman in a wheelchair, and she's holding a sign that says, "I vote because why not me? Why not me?" Yeah, me too. So in 2024, a total of 154 million people voted, and this is everybody, people with disabilities and people without disabilities. Of that 154, 20 million people with disabilities voted, meaning that disabled voters represented 13% of all voters in 2024. And this is good news, voter turnout increased from people with disabilities, or voter turnout, this is written weirdly on this slide, decreased less among people with disabilities than people without disabilities. So I'm going to talk about there's consistently a turnout gap between people with disabilities, voters with disabilities, and voters without disabilities. Voters with disabilities usually vote at higher rates than people with disabilities, and we're going to talk about some of the reasons why. But in 2024, let's go back to that, the voter turnout gap started to close, which is a big deal. And I know we're not a big crowd, but let's get a whoop whoop, some applause. Yeah, thank you. If people with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would be 2 million more votes cast in election. And that's across gender, that's across age, political affiliation, etc. And I shout out to the headphones in the back. So think about the impact that would have if every eligible disabled person voted. What might our country look like?
I think we would have no wait lists, or shorter wait lists, and more opportunities for better services.
So Carly says that she thinks we would have no wait lists or fewer wait lists for services and more opportunities for services, what else would our country or Florida look like if every disabled person voted?
I would say there would be better transportation access for everyone with all types of disabilities, crossing county lines to and from.
Better transportation access for all kinds of people with disabilities crossing county lines to and from. I love that.
I think there would be, regardless of what it looked like, I think there would be more representation of people with disabilities across the board, whether that's in political spaces or otherwise, because they would have to pay attention to us as a voting bloc. We're not even paid attention to a lot of times as a voting bloc.
So regardless of what it looked like, there would be more disability representation in all spaces, including political ones, and people would have to pay attention to us as a voting bloc. What else would be the impact on our country or on Florida or on your county or on your city? Easier access to health care. Okay. What an incredible vision for our nation and for your state you all have. I also think voting itself would be easier because voting itself is hard.
I think we would have more individualized education and job opportunities.
More individualized education and job opportunities, yeah. I think we would have less discrimination against people with disabilities.
More competitive job opportunities for those with disabilities, because unfortunately people with disabilities don't get hired because of the competitive workforce.
Awesome. So I mentioned that I thought that voting would just be easier because voting is difficult. And right now, there are many, many barriers to the ballot. One is polling place inaccessibility. I know this is not Florida, but AAPD has a partner in Michigan called Detroit Disability Power. And one of the things that we do with Detroit Disability Power is a polling place audit. That audit found that 87% of all polling places in Detroit had at least one access barrier. 87%. Another barrier to voting is strict voter ID laws. So did you all know that people with disabilities are way less likely to have a current ID? That's for a variety of reasons. So whenever there are strict voter ID laws, it disenfranchises people with disabilities from voting. And I've had this happen to me. I moved to Texas once upon a time, and I had my ID from Washington, D.C., and when I went to go vote, even though I was a registered voter, I was told that I could not because I didn't have a Texas ID. Wow. I fought it, and ultimately I was able to vote because I knew my rights. But if I hadn't known my rights and hadn't been a strong advocate, I wouldn't have been able to vote. Another major issue that people with disabilities face when trying to vote is a lack of accessible information about voting. Sometimes it's not written in plain language, or a Secretary of State's website is not accessible to tools like screen readers. There's also a growing number of laws regarding who can assist people with disabilities when we vote. So all of you, when you go vote, have the right to assistance. But there are new laws coming, and we'll talk more about this, that say only certain people who have been cleared by the state can help you. And really, I should be able to choose whoever I want to help me. It should be somebody that I trust. There's also a lot of disenfranchisement that people with disabilities face, including guardianship. In some states, like Ohio, if someone is under guardianship, they keep their right to vote. But in most states, as soon as you're under a guardianship, you lose your right to vote, even though you might be under a guardianship because you need support managing your finances, and it has nothing to do with you actually being able to vote. Always, people with disabilities are encountering bias and incorrect and harmful prejudice. We might be told that disabled people can't vote, even though we can. And I'll just add, we've already talked about this, transportation itself can be a big barrier to voting. Especially in places where you really have to drive to get around, and maybe your polling place is very far from where you live. I've had folks where if their polling place has changed at the last minute and they have to schedule their paratransit ride at least 24 hours in advance, and they can't reschedule it once that change has happened, they don't get to vote. Finally, limiting drop boxes or having complicated rules or inaccessible mail-in ballots. One of the times that I voted, I used a ballot box, and it was during the COVID-19 pandemic. I was worried about going to vote in person and getting exposed to COVID, so I wanted to vote using a ballot box. When I went to the closest ballot box to me, it was completely obstructed by road construction. And so thankfully, I was with someone who put my ballot in the ballot box. But if I'd been by myself, I wouldn't have been able to vote. I would have had to come up with a completely new plan. There are some areas in the country, huge swaths of space, that have one ballot box for the whole space. That's inaccessible. On this slide is an older photo in black and white with a woman using a wheelchair in front of a sign that says Clark for Congress, and she's holding a sign that says, "We can't vote here." So there are some pretty bad trends happening in the voting rights space right now. There are efforts to control who can register to vote. Some of you may have heard about the SAVE Act, which would require people to prove that they're a citizen in order to register to vote. The SAVE Act would require people to use their passports and would create lots of issues, particularly for women who have changed their last name when they've gotten married. The SAVE Act also limits who can vote via vote by mail. And do you know who uses vote by mail a lot? People with disabilities, because of things like inaccessible transportation and inaccessible polling places. Now, there have been 31 state versions of the SAVE Act introduced, and 8 of them have already been enacted. There have also been attacks on voter registration drives and efforts to limit who and which organizations can register people to vote. Florida is actually one of these states. AAPD, and we do a lot of voter registration, we cannot register people to vote in Florida. Groups like Disability Rights Florida can. You have to go through a process of being certified by the state to register people to vote, and if you don't go through that process, you risk jail time. The consequences are very severe. There's also efforts to redistrict and dilute the power of the vote, and we saw this in the recent Supreme Court decision, Louisiana versus Calais. There are efforts to restrict and limit the methods of voting. So we're seeing efforts to change ballot return deadlines. There's another case that was just in the Supreme Court, RNC versus Watson, where they tried to say that a mail-in ballot had to be returned basically a week before Election Day in order to count. And that is completely different than how mail-in voting has ever worked in this country. There are efforts to reduce early voting days, hours, and locations. As I've already mentioned, there are attacks on voter assistance. And generally, there's been a decrease in trust in elections, which creates confusion. There have recently been a series of election executive orders that seem like our right to vote is being taken away, but guess what? The executive branch of government can't do that. Congress and the Constitution can do that. Thankfully, there's also some really good trends. So in 2025, 51 bills were passed across states to improve election access. And to compare that to the bad news, 37 bad bills were passed. So the good is winning. Currently in 2026, there are 731 bills to improve voter access and 333 to restrict. So more than double the number of state bills out there hoping to improve disability voting access. We have a number of states that are working on their own State Voting Rights Act. So one of the bills at the federal level that gives disabled people things like accessibility when we vote is the Voting Rights Act, which there have been many attempts to weaken. So some states are creating their own State Voting Rights Act, and I'm going to give a shout out to a group of disability advocates in Vermont who have been working on the Vermont Voting Rights Act. And one of the things that Vermont does is it requires for primary elections for people to vote in person. And the Vermont disability advocates are working to say primary voting should be absentee as well. There are bills addressing disenfranchisement, increasing access to early voting, and bills that help to improve the ballot curing process. Do folks know what ballot curing is? All right. I'm seeing one head nod. Do you want to tell us?
It's the process in which, so if you are voting provisionally, or let's say in Florida particularly, yeah, thank you. So in Florida particularly, if you need to vote provisionally, let's say you don't have you show up without the proper ID, or you move polling places but you show up to the wrong one, or there's something that happens, there's a process by which you can vote provisionally, and they will say, okay, you can vote, but we're not going to count your ballot until you can show that you have the proper ID. You can show that you have these things. And in Florida, and maybe federally, that is you have 10 days to do that. It's actually
That's Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's actually a very difficult process. A lot of times you have to go in person. I've actually had that happen to me because a lot of times where it happens with people with disabilities is signature matching.
Yes.
So, we sign our ballot, and for me, I have CP as well. I have dexterity issues. My signature looks different every time I sign it. Mm-hmm. So they were like, this is not, I was like, that is me. Had to go in person to my local supervisor of elections, prove that I had the proper ID, prove that it was me, and then update my signature. And I have to do that actually pretty often because, again, they're just like, all the time, they're like, this is not you. I'm like, it is. So that, it can happen for a number of different reasons, but signature matching is one of the main ones.
Thank you so much. You are taking words out of my mouth. So ballot curing is when the state or the county basically says, we're not sure that this is actually your vote, so we need to cure it, right, to make sure it's kind of healthy, if you want to think about it that way. And for people with disabilities, one of the main reasons this happens is around signature matching, whether you have cerebral palsy and you have dexterity issues, or if you're blind and someone is signing your ballot for you because the signature process itself is not accessible. That means you've got different signatures. So it's really important to pay attention to a few different dates when we're looking at voting. The deadline to register to vote, when early voting happens, when election day happens, and when the ballot cure deadline is. You just mentioned it's 10 days in Florida. Some states it's longer, it changes all the time, but folks have to pay attention to whether or not they get communication from the state saying, hey, we're not sure we're going to count your ballot.
Which a lot of times also, talking about communication, at least here, does not happen in time for people
Right.
to do that.
So sometimes people don't even get the notice that their ballot is going to be cured before the deadline. But there's some good work happening to make ballot curing easier. We have more good news. More good news. Data collection around the disability vote is improving thanks to the Elections Assistance Commission and Rutgers University. As we've already talked about, the turnout gap between disabled voters and non-disabled voters is shrinking. In 2020, disabled voters voted at a rate 7% lower than non-disabled people. In 2022, just 2 years later, that 7% had reduced to less than 4%, and that is a very big deal. We know the problems that people with disabilities face when we vote, and we also know the solutions, and that is important, and this data reflects that. So one of the solutions that is making a big difference is that states expanded access to vote by mail from 2018 to 2022, and that caused significantly higher voter engagement across the entire American population. The other good news is that there are initiatives like Rev Up that people can get connected to. So Rev Up comes out of the American Association of People with Disabilities, which is my organization, and Rev Up stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. Rev Up was founded in 2016, so it's 10 years old this year, thank you, by grassroots advocates in Texas. And this is actually a photo of a group of people with Rev Up New Jersey, group of disabled people, and they're all wearing their Rev Up shirts with a big sign. I wanted to take a moment to remember Bob Kafka. Bob is the person who created Rev Up. He passed last year, a disability advocate. And how many of you attended Joe Shapiro's talk yesterday? Most of you, okay. Joe spent a lot of time talking to Bob because Bob was extremely instrumental in so many disability rights wins in the United States. On this slide, there's a photograph of him speaking at a Rev Up rally in Texas. There's also a photograph of him holding a sign that said "Separate was never equal" while protesting in front of an inaccessible bus. He was a part of the Gang of 18 that helped us get accessible transportation. And then the final photo on this slide is Bob negotiating with Mark McClellan during a protest for a program called Money Follows the Person, which is a program that uses money that people would otherwise use in nursing homes and make sure it gets applied to the community. And I mean, Bob was really responsible for Money Follows the Person, accessible transit, and the last thing that he really worked on was creating Rev Up. And so I really miss Bob a lot, and I hope that we can all honor his legacy by getting engaged in building the power of the disability vote. So how are we doing that? Through Rev Up, we are working to increase civic engagement in the disability community, and we are improving the accessibility of elections. What is civic engagement? Getting involved in your community, showing up to places like this, the forum last night, making sure that people in power understand who you are, building those relationships. There's so much you can do and get engaged even if you can't vote. You might be under 18, right? You can't register to vote yet. You may be under guardianship. You may have missed the deadline to register to vote in Florida, but there are still so many things that you can do to build the civic power of people with disabilities. Sometimes you can even register people to vote if you can't register yourself. Hello. Yeah.
So the very first thing that we need to do for our children, for our family members, when you hear a presidential candidate on television make fun of a reporter with a disability, we should have addressed it.
A lot of people did.
I don't feel we did it enough. I felt that we as a voting bloc should have addressed it and called it out, because that should have never have happened. I almost cried. I have a son with cerebral palsy, and he may not speak as well as you and I, but to have a presidential candidate do that on television,
Yeah.
come on now.
And he's continued to do it, right?
Come on now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I was appalled. I mean, I was almost in tears, because how can this happen in this time? And that rolled us back how many years ago to when people with disabilities were expected to be in a institution. That reminded me of that. I mean, I'm not that old, but I heard about it, and that reminded me of that. I don't know if did it roll over our heads? Are we overlooking these things? We need to be strong. We need to speak up. Anytime someone is disrespected, whether it's to your race or as a female or as a person with disability, we have got to stand up. And I don't know, how can we be stronger as a block, a voting block, looking out for our family members? How can we not let time be rolled back like this? How do we do this? I don't know.
Well, let's talk about it. So what we do at Rev Up is we have state coalitions, and we host regular meetings to share goals and strategies across states. We also work to organize in states. So that's working on elections, sending comments to the Election Assistance Commission, and also trying to combat these election executive orders that are coming out right now, which will disenfranchise people from voting. Here's a map of most of our state coalitions. There's actually more now than there were when we created this map. And these are 22 active Rev Up state disability voting coalitions. I think now the number has grown to 28. And as you can see, Florida's on the map. In Florida, we have the Access the Vote Coalition, which is run by Disability Rights Texas, shout out. Texas, why did I just say that? Texas on my brain. Florida, run by Disability Rights Florida. Access the Vote Florida works to increase the political participation of disability communities while also engaging candidates on disability issues. So they host things like disability candidate forums, which they're working on now. When do you think the disability candidate forum is going to be?
Sometime after the primaries, so likely September-ish. And we are a small but also mighty group, so our meetings, just as a plug, are at 10 a.m. on Fridays.
Look, it's on the slide.
So we can come join. That's
Yeah.
my plug. I'll stop stealing your thunder right now.
No, we're growing the thunder, right? We're growing the power. So Access the Vote Florida hosts calls every Friday from 10 to 11 a.m. They're working on eliminating barriers to voting, educating people with disabilities about issues and candidates, promoting turnout of voters with disabilities, and engaging candidates and the media on disability issues. And on this slide is their logo that says Access the Vote Florida with a white outline of Florida on it.
One more plug, just because you mentioned it
Yeah.
earlier, but DRF, and then in conjunction, hopefully this year, with Access the Vote Florida and also Common Cause, DRF has a partnership with Common Cause, does poll site accessibility surveys.
So Disability Rights Florida, in conjunction with Access the Vote Florida and Common Cause, are going to be doing polling place audits.
Yes.
Yes. So on this slide is a series of proclamations from last year's Disability Voting Rights Week. There's a proclamation on here from the city of Naples, from the city of Fort Myers, from Lee County, and one more that I can't read. But part of what we do during Disability Voting Rights Week in getting the disability community recognized as a powerful political constituency is getting these proclamations from local elected officials. The Florida Disability Voting Hotline is 877-352-7337. I'm going to say it again, 877-352-7337. So if you are voting or have questions about how to vote or what your rights are, call that hotline, contact Access the Vote Florida. I wanted to give some examples of voter outreach, and I'm sad that the woman who made the last comment left, because I think this is some of what she was talking about. How can we build power? Voter outreach can look a lot of different ways. And so Rev Up Georgia did a community art project and registered people to vote. So these are photographs of that workshop and getting community members engaged in creating art and registering them to vote at the same time. Rev Up Tennessee and Rev Up Alabama have done a ton to increase election accessibility. Rev Up Alabama specifically has been fighting for curbside voting access, which people were trying to take away. And so on this slide, there's a woman outside of a polling place wearing a Rev Up shirt and a group of people with disabilities watching a vote in the Alabama State House on curbside voting. Rev Up is also fighting voter suppression. Rev Up Texas was a plaintiff in a lawsuit that tried to limit who could receive support at the polls. And guess what? They won. So this really bad bill that was called SB1 is no longer on the books because of the work of Rev Up Texas and many other organizations. So there's a group of people with disabilities and attorneys. This was after they testified in the lawsuit. And then building civic engagement. Rev Up Virginia hosted a workshop on how to use accessible voting devices. And this is always incredibly powerful. Many people with disabilities who have access needs at the polls have never actually realized that they can vote independently. But there are different voting devices that allow people with disabilities to vote independently, whether or not they read the ballot aloud, they provide alternate ways of pushing buttons, or they're adjusted, they have adjusted heights for folks who need to sit like me. Rev Up Virginia also hosted a Disability Governors Candidates Forum for the recent Virginia governor's race. And this was the only candidate forum that every candidate for governor in Virginia attended because they allowed them to participate in person or virtually. So this is once again an example of accessibility benefiting everyone, and we can use our commitment to accessibility to build our power. Rev Up Philly, which is our only city-based coalition, also hosted a mayoral town hall on disability issues, and they had most candidates for mayor show up to this town hall, and they created ways for people with disabilities to send in their questions both in person and remotely in advance, and it was hugely, hugely successful. So on this slide is an image of the flyer that they prepared with all of the candidates for mayor, the Rev Up Philly logo, and the organizations that came together to do this. So I want you all to join us. Join Access the Vote Florida. Become a poll worker. One of the reasons that people with disabilities experience so many barriers to voting is because many poll workers aren't aware of what accessibility can look like. Having disabled people be poll workers is a really powerful tool for visibility and a tool to say disabled people have the right to vote. So right now, AAPD is trying to recruit more people with disabilities to be poll workers, become the access expert at your polling place. You can also volunteer for election protection. So election protection happens every election. There's a website, www.866ourvote.org. And what AAPD does, along with the National Disability Rights Network and many other organizations, is monitor the calls and emails and chats that get sent to the election protection hotline. And we work in real time to find solutions. So sometimes it's people who need a ride. Sometimes people don't know where their polling place is. And if we have more, the issues that are reported most frequently to the election protection hotline are disability issues. Did you all know that? Most frequently. So we need more disability advocates staffing election protection, volunteering for election protection to provide voters with information they need to vote. Just like Access the Vote Florida hosts regular calls, so does Rev Up. We host national calls on a quarterly basis, and our next one is August 22nd from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And again, join Access the Vote Florida. You can email our national team at revup@aapd.com, and we'll get you connected to the right folks. And you can also celebrate Disability Voting Rights Week with us. So Disability Voting Rights Week is a national campaign to celebrate the power of the disability vote. The theme for this year is Become an Accessible Democracy Defender. Disability Voting Rights Week is September 14th through 18th. We just released our toolkit to help promote DVRW. And if you decide to host a Disability Voting Rights Week event, get ready. We will send you a box of swag. I know everyone loves swag. It's good swag too. That's what I like to hear. So if you submit your event by July 15th, we will send you a box of swag. And on this July 15th, send us your Disability Voting Rights Week vote. You can. So if you download the toolkit, you can sign up to host an event. And on this slide is a photograph of Rev. Virginia with big blue vote letters. And that, my friends, is it. So, any questions, comments, visions for the future? Go ahead.
Would you say there's a lack of transparency when it comes to people with disabilities voting? And if so, how would you improve that?
I think there's a lack of transparency sometimes, and it can vary a lot by the state or by a particular election. One of the ways that we improve transparency is by increasing access to information and making sure the information itself is accessible. So I believe there was an assessment of Secretary of State's websites. Does everybody know what a Secretary of State is? Some people are not in their heads. The Secretary of State is the person in your state who basically controls the voting systems. And so it's their website that says what the rules are for voting. And a lot of times it can be really hard to find the rules for people with disabilities to vote. Most of the time when you look up, let's say, disability voting in your state, the first thing that comes up is absentee voting. But not everyone's going to want to vote absentee. Some people are going to want to go to a polling place and cast their ballot. And in reality, people should be able to vote in whatever way is most accessible to them, whether that's going on election day, sending in an absentee ballot, putting your ballot in a ballot box, or for some blind folks, that means voting electronically, which very few states allow, 12 specifically, allow folks to vote electronically. Right. In Florida is like kind of, sort of. But an issue with many places is that they require a paper ballot. And if you are somebody who has a print disability, like if you're blind or if you have dyslexia or another learning disability, having a printout of your ballot is not going to be accessible to you, which is one of the reasons that we want secure electronic voting, not for everybody, but as an option for folks that it's most accessible for. So I don't know if that answers your question. One thing that I think we've come to expect is that voting, that the outcome of elections is available very quickly. And part of the reason we expect that is because of like the 24-hour news cycle. Actually, we should make sure that people have enough time to count the votes accurately. And we should be okay with however long that takes. And so one way that we can increase, not necessarily transparency, but knowledge about what is supposed to happen after a vote gets cast is just by educating people on the processes so that they know after you cast your ballot, here is where it goes, here's how it gets counted, here's how it gets counted again, because what we ultimately want is to be able to trust our election results. You're a poll worker. Thank you for your service.
I didn't understand completely. When I first started working, I started under Eon Sanchez, which is the supervisor of elections for Leon County, and then Mark Early, who is the current supervisor of elections. I worked with both of them.
Great.
And I had to understand the process. It's long, tedious hours. The meticulous way that we monitor the machines, making sure that the folders are set up right so we can just hand them off, the voting rolls. And me having a better understanding, I could advise people in my community, hey, when you get ready to go vote, be patient. Make sure you have your proper ID with you, and so you can go through the process. And then after everyone is voted, that's when the real work begins. It gets real tedious. You know, you stand around a little bit because you're waiting your turn. Some of the people who handle the paper ballots or take them out of the machines to move them over to the boxes. That's a real strenuous process. It's not rushed, right? And it's checked and double checked. So understanding it from behind the scenes helps you to share with the rest of the community how important it is. And it does take a long time. It's not a quick process at all, but it's well worth it. And I have faith in any other county in this state I don't know about, but Leon County, they wear white gloves and they really take their time and they follow the process. And we're tired, we're weakened by the end of the day
Yeah.
and want to go home, but everybody sticks with it until it's done. And that's what builds the trust for me. And I can tell you, most of the state, all of the state rather, they really do take their time with that process because it's not fast to count and recount and double check and make sure, and is that box sealed, and all of that. So it looks like to someone on the outside, oh, you don't need to do all of that, but yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you do. So yeah.
So I have a question for you, and then I have a suggestion. Question is, what made you want to become a poll worker?
My grandmother was a poll worker.
Your grandmother was a poll worker.
I take voting very seriously. I don't know if you could tell by looking at me, but I'm a black woman. And my grandmother instilled in me that voting was not only a right, but a privilege. People died so I could vote.
Yep.
So I'm very serious about it. I always take time in the general election. I'm not so available in the primary, but in the general election, I always find somewhere to go and volunteer. If it's only for an hour or a shift, hopefully I can do it for a whole day because it's important. And it's important for people that I know who vote in my precinct to see me there. I live in the neighborhood.
Yep.
They pass by me every day. I don't want them to just think I'm just taking up space. I am active in my community in every way that I can. And what was your other question?
My other thing was a suggestion, which is that next year at this conference, you should do a workshop on becoming a poll worker. Yeah, see?
I'll try to get with,
Lori's right here.
well, I was a
Does she-
presenter. I was a presenter on yesterday. I try to
There you
present
go.
something every year, but to me, it's really, really important, especially now in the climate that we're in. People are losing faith, and we need to reinstill that faith in it. That faith is going to come from the everyday people that you see and work with every day. Those are the people that you want to see. My grandmother polled at historic Lincoln Neighborhood Center, which is in historic Frenchtown where I grew up. And when she retired, she was even more active. But the amount of time that she took to get ready to go across the street to be a poll worker, she packed a picnic lunch. You know, she really was into it, and I learned from her. And as a punishment, she took me with her one time because I couldn't be left to my own devices that day, so I had to go to the poll with Mother, and I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I learned how the voting system worked, and so when I turned 18 and registered to become, a voter, I was ready for it. I was ready for it, and I encouraged every young person in my family after me, and I asked them, have you registered to vote? I don't need to vote. It don't matter. I was like, your vote counts. You need to vote, and you need to know how your vote counts. You need to know your candidates. You need to study the pamphlet, and you need to really do your research. People reach out to me because they know I'm kind of involved with polls, working at the polls, and they was like, what you think about, so what do you think about it? I throw it right back to them. Don't ask me, because I'm going to pick a person for my reasons. I look at a candidate, and I look at their platform, and how does their platform impact me? And that's what I encourage people to do. But the whole thing, you need to know about the polling, you need to know about the process, you need to know about candidates. Voting is such a serious thing, and whatever the outcome is, as long as you know you put your 2 cents in, then you can talk. If you haven't voted, I don't want to hear nothing you have to say. Don't talk to me unless you vote. So
There we
anyway,
go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions or thoughts that people want to share? Okay.
So one of the things, and I'm
And
very
tell everybody your name and what you do.
I'm Laura Minutello, and I'm the Senior Public Policy Analyst at Disability Rights Florida. And as Maria mentioned, we also help run Access to Vote Florida. But one of the things that we've really struggled with is energizing people around local elections. And I'm very passionate about that, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of local elections and just what you find if you find anything that helps energize people around local elections, because it's very easy to get energized around the federal elections and the bigger elections, right? But we also want to be invested in our communities.
Lauren, this is such a great comment because it's not just Access to Vote Florida or Disability Rights Florida that struggles with turnout in local elections. It's every group that's working on voting struggles with turnout in local elections. And I think, I can't remember who said it, but someone famous said all politics are local, and that's the truth. I actually think local elections might be more important than federal elections because local elections are about really about the things that affect your day-to-day lives. When's your trash getting picked up? Are your roads going to get fixed? What resources are your schools going to have? And I think part of the way that we try to get people engaged in local elections is making sure they know, what does your mayor do? What does your city council do? For ballot initiatives, right? There's often ballot initiatives for local elections that try to, for example, increase or decrease taxes for local resources. So they might want to do a penny tax to promote public transportation, or they might want to reduce taxes altogether, but that may mean that your trash only gets picked up once a week instead of twice. And I think oftentimes people don't realize, one, how much the local government controls, and two, they don't think it matters. And I'll use an example. I used to live in Texas. I lived in Harris County, which is the 4th largest county in the United States. Houston area. It's home to over 7 million people. And they just had an election for a primary for county judge, which is the person that's over the entire county. Anyone want to guess how many people voted? Less than 5%, you're right. 100,000 people voted in a county of 7.5 million.
Wow.
And that's just leaving opportunities on the table, right? So I think part of local elections is making sure people know what all these local offices actually do and how it impacts them. And two is, again, ensuring, like, not only do you know what the offices are and what they do, but how it really affects you. Ask people what they care about and say, okay, you want to change that or make sure it stays the same? Go vote. But everybody struggles with this. Do you have any suggestions on what we might do?
Oh man, I mean, I honestly, I think you made a good point around, making sure people know. So I think what I kind of take away from that is in terms of access to vote and maybe Disability Rights Florida, is creating resources that just explain, maybe we could create better resources that just explain what kind of local roles are and what local roles are, so that when people go to vote, they have an idea of what folks do. And I mean, a lot of that too, I find, and maybe this is again something for just access to vote or just anybody, is maybe we could be better about going and visiting local politicians. I know we work a lot with SOEs and supervisors of elections, which is the heads of, each county has a supervisor of elections. But I don't know that we've really tried to take people and tried to engage local officials.
Well, again, which is why I pointed out the Philadelphia Mayor's Forum that they hosted, right? Very engagement of local officials. A few years ago, one of the things that we worked on with Rev Up Georgia was their utilities commissioner election, right? This is the person that controls like how much people are paying for electricity and water. Really important role. And there was a runoff. And so we did a whole candidate forum just for that position. And there was a high engagement rate in that election.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of what stuck out to me when you kind of said that. So thank you for that.
Yeah. We've got a few more minutes. Any other questions or thoughts? Lori.
Somebody else has got one.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I can always sit and think in front of these people. Well, when it comes to it, when you said what can we do, in the state of Florida, we do not talk in schools. When I went to school 50 years ago, right, we, turning 18, getting your voter registration, that was a big badge of honor. So was getting your driver's license at 16. Well, 16-year-olds don't get their driver's license as quickly and aren't chomping at the bit like I did. You talk to them now, a lot of people just don't figure their vote counts.
Yeah.
How sad. And there's many places in the world where you don't have the opportunity to vote.
Right.
And they're not taking it seriously. And they're not looking at who is, what their platform has. Last night we had a couple of people talk. They don't have platforms for us. And why not?
Yep.
Not that some of us haven't written them for them, but they're not being used. So why are we an afterthought and why aren't we a thought? Why do we discount that when the schools have an assembly and maybe talk about, and this is Leon County, but if they talk about voting, they don't include all, the ESE class is not included. Why not?
Right.
Why not? Why did you just discount them altogether? We just think no one's going to show up. Well, why not? Why aren't you showing up? When Carly used to go with me all the time, but when you talk about this accessibility thing, I'd love to see it. Why isn't everything accessible?
Yeah.
I mean, why not? I mean, why? It's there, it's a law, why not? So, anyway, that's my spiel. Thank you.
So two things, just to what Lori mentioned. People can put registering to vote as a goal in an IEP, right? If you think about the transition IEP, which I believe in Florida starts at 14, you can have registering to vote by 17 as a goal in an IEP. And families should be able to articulate that as a goal for their sons and daughters. You can pre-register at 16 in Florida. That's great news. And a lot of states will allow pre-registration at 17, which is why I mentioned it, but Florida's even younger, 16. I would also argue that in the same way that a lot of people have to practice interviewing for jobs or practice going to particular places in their community, folks should practice voting so that it's not intimidating or scary when election day comes. And I'm going to go to you. You're going to close this out. With Rev Up, one of the things that we put out is candidate questionnaires so that our Rev Up coalitions can adapt them to their local elections. When we do presidential elections, we send our candidate questionnaires to every presidential candidate, every single one. Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Independent, and more. And when candidates fill them out, which not all of them do, we post them on our website so that people can see what any given candidate has to say on disability issues. The local candidate surveys, I think, are really important because it gives advocates an opportunity to name what issues are most important to them and get candidates on the record. So that I hope Access the Vote Florida is doing a candidate survey or at least a forum.
On that too, we're looking for people to partner as well. We want to expand the capacity of what we're able to do. So we did them similar to what AAPD does a few years ago, and just didn't have the capacity to do it in full. But we're going to do at least the statewide races this year. But I would love to be able to do more local.
I'll help you.
And then last comment
All
or
right.
question right here.
Sounds good.
My name's Jen. I'll give you time.
What a cool blanket.
I had it made on Amazon. It's all of her adventures,
It's awesome.
zip lining and everything. So I have a question. I feel like our generation is like the last one who got like that push because our parents and our grandparents were the go vote, let's do it. And I feel like the generations under us, they don't see the change, or for a lot of like us in the minority group, there's a lot of unanswered prayers.
Yeah.
So my question would be, what suggestions do you have to change the mindset of the younger generation? Because the older generation's seen the changes and they got to see beautiful transitions, where we had probably about a good 20 years of stalemate, 30 years of stalemate, and now we have this new uprising of people trying to make a change, but there's so many people that have given up that it doesn't count. So what would you suggest to try to help change people's mindsets, to encourage them to go vote and that they do matter?
So I have one thought, and it might seem contradictory. I can understand why a lot of people are disillusioned with electoral politics. I really can. And there are other ways to influence change. So if somebody's, and I'm going to use my brother as an example. My brother fits the profile of what you're describing. He has basically said, I'm done with voting. This is not producing the change that I want to see. I'm not going to vote again. It's a waste of my time, right? Which is heartbreaking for me to hear. Part of what we need to build as a nation is a kind of a muscle for civic engagement, the expectation that we're all going to be engaged in our communities, even if we don't vote. So for younger folks, it's like, okay, you can choose not to vote. You can make that choice. To what Lori said, in some places you can't even make that choice because you just can't vote. If you're going to choose not to vote, what else are you going to do to drive the change you want to see? Like, literally, are you going to go show up to public forums? Are you going to send in comments to your school boards? You know, trying to build that muscle of civic engagement so that they'll reconsider when the next election comes along. I don't know if this will work, but I think just the continued push to vote, people who have already decided that they're not going to do it, they're not going to listen. The other thing that you could do is cultivate this group of young people to be voter assistants, right? So like, maybe you don't want to vote, but help me vote. Help your daughter vote. Get them to see the power and value of making that choice and maintaining that right, so that maybe they respect it a little bit more. But I'm open to your suggestions too. Do you have any thoughts?
I just advocate a lot.
Yeah.
And I tell people, if you're not voting, you can't complain. Because you got to have some type of movement.
Yeah. I have to say, I used to think that way, and then I recognized that there are so many people who literally can't vote for a variety of reasons, right? And so just because somebody isn't voting doesn't mean they don't want to vote.
But they could advocate in different ways.
Correct.
But just what I tend to see is that a lot of people that have given up on voting, they've also given up on advocacy because it just they feel like it doesn't make the change.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say. Like, if people have given up on voting, we can't allow them to give up on the other kinds of advocacy. Get engaged in another way. So. All right, I think that's it, everybody. Thank you for being such a great audience, for really filling up this room with ideas. And let's build the power of the disability vote together. Thank you.